So yes, I'm going to talk today about smart cities specifically, which I think should build nicely on the presentations we've had so far, and talk about specifically some of the trends we're seeing happening in the cities that are actually doing projects at scale and how those are informing the direction the market's moving. So just briefly, who are we? So Silver Spring Networks, we provide the communication and data management platforms for utilities and cities. So that really means we help them connect up all the different devices they're looking to connect. We're almost 15 years old, so we've kind of been doing this before they even called it IoT. In fact, it used to be M2M, and that's kind of grown into IoT. And in total, we have networks in over 500 cities around the world, and we connect about 25 million devices of all different shapes and sizes. And we manage lots of data. So that's kind of what we do. We don't make the end devices. We partner with hundreds of companies like Sensing Labs to help connect that up. We make some software, but again, we do lots of partnering to bring that in. And we focus on, generally we focus on quite high reliability applications. So technologies, we work with a range of different standards, but with a focus on those that can enable very high reliability and resilience in these networks. So I thought before looking at smart cities, I would briefly talk about the smart grid market, because actually that's something that's really moved forward over the last 10 years. And there's a lot of lessons, I think, for the smart city market to take on board. So for most utilities, the smart grid journey started with this, an electricity meter. So about 15 years ago, a lot of the utilities in the US and in other markets decided they wanted to be able to read their electricity meters remotely. They had a relatively simple business case. They wanted to avoid estimated bills. They didn't want to have to visit the customers' homes, and they wanted to put in place tariffs that changed in price during the course of the day, so they now needed half-hourly data. So they first of all thought of this as a metering problem, and they asked all the people who'd made the meters for 100 years, can you put a radio in your meter? And lots of proprietary systems started to emerge, drive-by systems where a van would drive down and kind of pick up readings and things like this. And Silver Spring was formed at that time by a group that had worked in a lot of the internet technology development in the 90s and recognized actually this was an opportunity for utilities to put in place a flexible platform that could not just meet smart metering challenge today, but could actually do a lot more over time. And we were lucky enough to win a few big customers then and kind of go on this journey with them. So what happened next? Well, the first thing was, as they rolled out these meters, the customers hated them. So there was blockades, there was picket lines, people, stopped the smart meter campaigns, and it was quite quickly recognized the utilities who weren't really used to thinking about their customers, a lot of them, they called them endpoints quite often, hadn't really thought about what the benefits were for them and hadn't communicated to them. In many cases, hadn't even told them their tariff was changing. So they didn't change when they did the washing and their bill went up. So utilities had to respond because they now a huge backlash. And so one of the things they did was they enabled third parties to actually access the data from these meters. They recognized, well, we're not well set up to help people understand or get value from this. So they enabled third parties to get access to the data and start building products to help them explain how they were using energy and maybe help them save energy as well. And that very quickly helped get kind of citizens, homeowners on board. And to do this, they started developing standards that would enable standardization of this data, and that in turn led to this kind of ecosystem of other suppliers who said, well, we could use that data to inform the home heating or some other use case that perhaps the utility hadn't thought of. And so that started to grow. And the utility themselves recognized that they could use the core building blocks of their smart metering infrastructure to actually help other initiatives. So they could use the communication network to allow them to speak to their new electric vehicle chargers or their solar panels, or they could use the software platform they'd given people to understand their energy to actually help them understand their solar consumption, and so they could kind of plan their energy use better. And they also started to connect up all the other assets around the distribution grid. So they were connecting up substations, putting fault detection devices online, so they could now have kind of an unprecedented view of all what's happening right across their network. And that in turn led to data analytics. So companies started to develop algorithms that could detect if your fridge was about to fail, because they could spot the profile of the compressor had changed, or they could see if there was energy theft. Someone had spliced the lines and perhaps feeding a second home from the first home. And kind of the summary is that really they recognized that meter became this platform for ongoing innovation and kind of continues to give a lot more value than just the original business case that they were looking at. And so cities kind of came to the party a bit later in terms of wanting to kind of take advantage of the technology. 4 or 5 years ago really was when it started to gather some momentum. And well, is it the same? In reality, it's not. And I think that's in large part just because cities are quite a different organism to a utility. They are much more, they've evolved in a different way. They've got much more history. They've got a very different structure, and that changes how they want to engage with technology providers and make some additional barriers for them to think about. But as was said in the earlier presentations, there's lots that cities are now starting to experiment with. And so we're working with cities around the world to connect up a whole range of different services. This could be new assets that they're wanting to connect up that they're just installing, so electric vehicle chargers or information panels, or it could be assets that they've never connected before. So there's streetlights, for example, or electricity meters, or it could be assets that are connected today, but they want to try and integrate them more across other systems. So perhaps having their traffic management system so that it can integrate with the lighting system or otherwise. And interestingly, we're seeing street lighting playing a really big role in this. As was said in the last presentation, there's actually very few of these use cases that are moving forward at scale. Street lighting is one of the exceptions because the business case is very strong. So LED technology can allow cities to cut their street lighting bill in half, and street lighting very often is the largest single part of their energy bill. So it means cities around the world are changing their street lights wholesale over to LED, and many of them choose to put in place a control system at the same time. And so for a lot of cities we work with, the proposition is effectively saying the same thing. While you upgrade your lights, you can put in place a fabric that will help you innovate in all these other areas. So 4 trends that we see really driving this market and shaping how it's evolving. So the first one was talked a lot about in the last presentation, and it's the fact that cities now are really embracing this idea of open ecosystems. I think there was at once a point when big companies would say, well, give us a big check and we will give you a smart city. And that was, 10 years ago, that was maybe the vision of how a lot of businesses and some cities thought that would happen. But it's becoming clear that actually there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Every city might have the same challenges, but they're in a different priority order, and they've got a different political pressure, and they've got different local companies. And so the solution will look different in each case. And so as a result, companies are having to find new ways to work together in this more open environment, and many of the technologies we've talked about are helping enable that. And a good analogy to compare this to is the mobile industry. We look back 15 years and it was dominated by players that were very trusted technology. It worked well, but they insisted on doing everything was developed in-house. Every new feature was built by them, and so innovation was incremental and relatively slow. And they were overtaken by the companies that opened up and said, they'll focus on what they do well and let other people innovate and add features in other areas. And so it means we all have the same phone in our pocket, but it's probably doing 100 different things for each of us. And that's kind of the model that cities are looking to embrace now. And actually, a great example of that's here in Glasgow. Some of you might be familiar with the Future City Demonstrator, which is a project Glasgow delivered 3 years ago now. So they won £24 million from the government to build a demonstrator and showcase smart city technology. And a lot of it was leading edge at the time. And one of the most impressive things Glasgow did was they created this unified plan where they built an operations centre, an open data platform, and 4 demonstrators. But these all linked together, and they really fostered collaboration between them to try and ensure they got the maximum benefit from each of them together. We specifically did a demonstrator of how intelligent lighting could enable other use cases. So we connected up streetlights in various sites around the city, And we also connected up traffic monitoring cameras that were counting vehicles and pedestrians, so the lights were being adjusted in real time to make extra savings and improve safety, and also noise sensors, environmental sensors, and feeding all of that into the city open data platform. So those data streams fed in to the open data platform, which was a mix of static data and these new live feeds, and the focus there was on making that available for others to access. And they had a view on kind of a whole range of other things that they'd like to do next, building on this. So using the same cameras to monitor electric vehicle charging bays, so you could give drivers a clue if there's only less than 10 in Glasgow, so which ones are full and which ones are available as you drive in. Giving control of the street lighting to emergency services so that if there was a road traffic accident, they could turn the lights up on the street to help first responders. And even they were looking at monitoring the length of the taxi rank queue on outside Central Station, because they know if it goes past a certain point on a wet Saturday night, then there might be a fight breaks out. So they could send taxis there ahead of time and prevent that happening. So second trend, somewhat linked to that, is the challenge cities have is how to break down these silos they have. So the structure of cities, quite often the environmental services team will never have spoken to the highways team or the health team or the education team. And so as you look at these applications that can help multiple people, how do you actually get those delivered? And so cities are really working hard to find how can they share internally more effectively and how can they evolve to be able to collaborate better. And sharing could be anything from budgets, but it might just be sharing the problems you have or data that you already have and kind of making that available. And so cities are all kind of taking a different tack on how to do this. And indeed initiatives like the Digital Catapult are also helping facilitate this, helping provide kind of a neutral ground for different departments to work together. We see cities like Copenhagen have the Copenhagen Solutions Lab or the Urban ICT Arena in Stockholm. And closer to home in Bristol, they have the Bristol is Open initiative, and they recognized they were deploying communication networks for different applications over time. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, they ran a procurement for a citywide IoT network, which we won, and we've now delivered it's a mesh network across the city using 1% of the streetlights to create a mesh infrastructure, which basically gives very high resilience for high reliability applications. And they're looking at how they can use that as a tool to kind of grow the digital economy there and become world leaders in some of those applications. So third point, there's kind of recognition now that being a smart city isn't some kind of end goal. Certainly you can't run a procurement and buy one. It's kind of a change of mindset to change the way the city's organized, but also how it interacts with others. And it's more of adopting a new process so that you can evolve. So that means kind of planning that whatever you deploy today will actually change over the next 15, 20 years. And so building in things like firmware upgradability, planning in the capability to extend or change features in the field. And also finding a way to get partners and providers to work better together, which can be challenging. As it was mentioned, there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of competition, and cities are kind of having to find a way to bring these partners together. An example was in Copenhagen. We provided a lighting control system for the city to connect up 20,000 new LEDs and a communication platform. And they recognized there was a bit of a conflict between their street lighting program, which was turning lights down at night, and their cycle initiatives that were trying to get more cyclists on the road. So we worked with the provider of the traffic control system so that we put in place some sensors at the lights, and as cyclists set off from the lights, the traffic lights, the street lights above them will turn brighter so that a driver that otherwise might not have seen them won't jump the lights. So they're really trying to kind of get more collaboration between the different players. Some of these kind of things need some consideration up front. It can't all just evolve, we don't think, freely. Certain things need to be given some thought up front, and cities are starting to do that around things like security and privacy. It's been interesting for us coming from the smart grid market where security is very high and kind of always has been. Cities have probably a lower priority for security, I think in part because they've been doing a lot of experimentation, so it's maybe less important. But now things are moving to scale. There's lots of examples of systems that are being compromised, and security is very hard to retrofit after the fact. You need to give it some thought up front. And it's often said, why would someone want to hack a particular system, a streetlight system or a weather station system? But the reality is, people will always find a reason to do it, even if it's just for their own entertainment. And so we think this is going to be something that's going to continue to grow in importance. So the final point is that, thankfully, much as we saw in the smart grid market, citizens are really being put at the heart of this. It's kind of recognized it's not about technology, it's about improving the lives and improving the services for citizens. So this is a big focus for most cities that are working in this area. So that could be just exploring their needs more. The street lighting initiative I mentioned in Copenhagen, one of the first things they did after they awarded the technology contract was they walked every street in the city with the contractor to speak to all the businesses and homeowners to see, is there anything else we can improve? Well, we're changing all the lights in the city, can we fix anything else? And they got lots of insights to kind of fine-tune that and make it more useful for the city. Cities are changing the way that they speak to their citizens, putting in place tools that people can report issues, or in Moscow, they even have a system where citizens can vote on which thing to fix. We're going to do this or this, which one would you like to do? And kind of trying to get more participation from citizens, particularly important as budgets are becoming more restricted. And thinking about every citizen is something else. One of the biggest lighting projects that we're involved in is in Florida. So there we're connecting up over 500,000 streetlights onto a smart control system. They're installing 7,000 a week, so it's a huge logistical challenge. And yet we spent a lot of time talking about 642 of those lights and building special functionality for those because they happen to be in a turtle breeding area. And I don't know if anyone saw Planet Earth 2 recently, but baby turtles, when they're hatched, navigate to the sea by the moon. And so if the street lighting is too bright, then they can head straight to the road, which doesn't end well. And so, this customer who was deploying all these lights also put in place controls so that on the particular nights of the year that the lights will dim down in kind of sync with the turtle cycle. So it's something very bespoke. I'm not sure how applicable that will be for other cities, but it shows kind of how customized and how different these cities will be. And my last slide here is we're also seeing organizations looking at how to make cities fun. So this is an example of a project in Bristol where some street lights were hijacked in the middle of the night, and they replaced the light source with a projector and a camera. And unbeknownst to the local residents, and as people walked past, their shadows were recorded and replayed for the next person. And after a lot of confusion, this led to people dancing in dark alleys that they previously would never have visited. And and Playable City actually is an initiative that looks at solving these social problems in innovative ways. So putting musical instruments on bridges that aren't well used to stop people crossing the road and getting run over, and things like that to try and remember no one really wants the dystopian view of a city that a lot of sci-fi portrays. We're trying to make them more interesting and livable as well. So that's me. So.